So I've made some changes to my everyday riding style. I think these changes make me a safer and better prepared rider for the unexpected events on the road. Today, let's talk about it. Hey, my name's Kevin and I release a weekly video here on MCrider focused on road skills or road strategy to help make you a better rider. At the end of this video, head over to MCrider.com or just type MCrider in the search bar here on YouTube and you can watch every MCrider video ever released. So man, old habits are hard to break. When I started to learn to ride a motorcycle properly, I was taught that good old-fashioned slow look, press and roll technique of cornering a motorcycle. In fact, during my years of teaching the MSF course, that's what I've taught hundreds of other riders as well. If you don't know what that is, it's pretty simple. It's a technique taught by the Motorcycle Safety Foundation for cornering a motorcycle. So basically, you slow prior to the corner while a motorcycle is still going in a straight line. You do all of your slowing while that motorcycle is still straight up and down. Then you look in the direction that you want to go. You press on the handlebar on the side of the intended turn, and you roll on or maintain maintenance throttle through the corner. Now, I was out for a ride the other day and I noticed for the first time that my riding habits had completely changed. I trail brake on every corner now. So before we get into this too far, let's define what trail braking is for those of you who may not know. So when you're trail braking, you still do the majority of your slowing prior to the corner. So I'm still slowing with my front and rear brakes just like I always did. And you still do that look and you press on the hand grip in the direction that you want to turn. The difference is that you maintain slight pressure on that front brake into the corner, where before you'd let off the brakes, then you look, press and roll. Here you maintain just a little bit of front brake and you maintain that pressure into the corner. So up until that point where you start to roll on the throttle again, you're maintaining that slight pressure. On the track, the advantage of doing this is that it allows you to go into a corner faster, but we're not interested in speed on the street. On the street, it has nothing to do with the speed. The advantage is that you keep the front forks compressed, which gives you some advantages that we'll talk about later. So let me state this disclaimer up front. I still think slow look, press and roll is the best technique to teach new riders. As an instructor, you see all kinds of potential riders that come into a new rider class. Some have experience and some riders don't. And some riders who say they've got a lot of experience struggle a whole lot when they actually start riding the motorcycle out on the parking lot. And I believe slow look, press and roll is the easiest technique to teach. And it's the easiest technique to master for riders who've not developed good brake and throttle control yet. Now, I had this discussion at the International Motorcycle Show with Nick Einetsch, who's a huge proponent for trail braking, and he also runs the Yamaha Champion Riding School. Now, Nick in his presentation hinted that the MSF should disregard that old slow look, press and roll technique and pretty much teach trail braking to brand new riders and all riders coming through that class. After his presentation at the IMS, I got a chance to talk with Nick for a few minutes and ask him some questions. And I asked about his comment on leaving behind that slow look, press and roll. And Nick stated that trail braking is all they teach at the Yamaha Champion Riding School. And they have new riders who've been very successful with it with very little riding experience. And that he believes ultimately it's a safer riding technique. So let's look at those two aspects. Is it best to teach new riders this technique, and is it safer? One of those I agree with, and one I still have some questions about. So first, should trail braking be taught to brand new riders? Now, Nick states that he's had success teaching new riders at his riding school, and I have no reason to doubt that. And I bet he's got good success with the technique. But I also think he's teaching a different set of students than those who come through the MSF class. So why do I say that he's teaching different students? Well, currently the 2-day cost for the Champions Riding School, Yamaha Champions Riding School, is $2,200. That's not counting the cost if you rent a motorcycle from them. You can add insurance to that and gear rental, and it gets a little more expensive for 2 days of training. So those numbers add up quite a bit, but the cheapest option is $2,200 for 2 days. Now, if a rider's spending that kind of money, they're serious about learning to ride a motorcycle. They're committed to getting better, and they're putting their money to show their intent to become a good rider. Now, everything I've heard about the school states that it's well worth the investment to go, that you get good training out of it. But the cost of an MSF class for 2 days is $200 to $300. That includes a motorcycle helmet and gloves. And many riders here are only interested in getting their license. Some are only interested in doing the bare minimum to pass and get their license so they can get out on the street. So there's a difference in the rider who shows up for the Yamaha Champions Rider School and one who shows up on a parking lot for an MSF class. There just is. There's difference in that students' desire to learn, and the cost of that class and them showing up for it shows that difference sometimes. Not in everybody, but in some riders. That's why I still believe it's the best technique, that slow look, press, and roll, to teach new riders. And for that matter, it's something that you're comfortable with. I see no reason to change that technique out on the street. However, I do agree with Nick that in the hands of a competent rider, trail braking is still a safer technique. Now, if you've taken an MSF course, it will be drilled into your head to never touch the brakes, especially that front brake in a corner. In fact, some instructors are so adamant about it that riders have visions of that tire sliding out from under them with just the slightest amount of pressure on that front brake in a slight lean. Now, the reason why this is taught in a new rider class is that if you are leaned over and the front brake is applied abruptly or aggressively, which new riders often do, you can cause a crash by doing that. Now, that doesn't mean that it can never be used on a motorcycle leaned over, but it has to be done correctly. So I really like how Nick describes traction. A motorcycle tire, according to Nick, has 100 theoretical points of traction. If you go above that 100 points, the tire will slide and lose traction. And those points are also variable. So on an improperly inflated tire, on a slick surface, on a surface with debris, you can more quickly run through those 100 points of traction. And cornering is all about managing those 100 points. When you lean a motorcycle over in a corner, you use some of your 100 points. The farther you lean, the more points you use. But if I lean a motorcycle over and I'm using 40 points of that 100 points of traction I've got available to me, I've still got 60 points left over of traction for braking. One word on traction and how you apply those points is very important. A motorcycle tire is very good at handling a heavy load, meaning you can ask a lot of that tire before it actually loses traction. But it's not good at handling an abrupt load. So if you grab the brakes, the tire will lose traction. So how does this look with the brake hand? Well, let's say I've got an emergency situation and I want to use all 100 points of my braking, right? I've got to get this motorcycle stopped now. If I squeeze that brake and it sounds like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, that's about as fast as I can talk here in Texas. But you get the picture. You want to use all 100 points, but you're progressively squeezing that brake to get to those 100 points. Now, in the same situation, if I go 5100 and I grab the front brake, that tire is very likely to lose traction. It doesn't function well with an abrupt load, but it can handle a lot of load if it's progressively applied. Because of this, it's important to use proper braking technique in a corner. So one way you can practice this with zero risk is sit on your motorcycle in the garage with the engine off and the motorcycle in neutral. You want to slowly squeeze that front brake, and at first you'll hear a small click, right? You'll hear a little click coming from the brake. That's the switch that engages the brake light. Just past that click, the brakes begin to squeeze on the caliper. So squeeze gently on the brake and roll the motorcycle back and forth with the motorcycle in neutral. When you can roll back and forth and yet you feel some resistance from the brakes, that's the amount of pressure on the brake that we're talking about when you're trail braking into a corner on the street. So it's not heavy braking on the street. We've already done all of our heavy braking before leaning the motorcycle over. We're just maintaining that light pressure on the front brake as we lean the motorcycle into the corner. So you may be asking, what's the advantage of doing this? Well, keeping a little bit of pressure on the front brake gives the rider a few really big advantages. It keeps the forks compressed. By keeping the forks compressed, it effectively shortens the wheelbase of the motorcycle, allowing it to turn sharper. So when you keep that pressure on that front brake, that light pressure, it keeps the forks compressed. And because your forks are not running straight up and down, right, they're at a little bit of an angle, that brings the front tire up and back, and it shortens the wheelbase of the motorcycle, allowing it to turn sharper. So even just moving the fork up and in just a little bit will allow your motorcycle to turn sharper at that entry of the corner. If you release the brakes, the opposite happens. So if you use that slow look, press and roll technique, and before you get into the corner, you release the brakes, the weight goes to the back of the motorcycle, the forks extend, and it actually reduces the turning radius of the motorcycle a little bit. It also gives that front tire more traction. If you add weight to the tire, it has more traction. If you remove weight from the tire, it has less traction. So right at that point where we're really wanting that front tire to work, by using slow look, press and roll, and we're rolling on the throttle, we're reducing weight from that front tire, and then we're asking it to turn into a corner, where if we keep just a little bit of pressure, we're giving that tire more traction, and right when we need it, at the turn end of the corner. By keeping slight pressure on that front brake, you're keeping some weight on that tire, and you're giving it more traction. So next, if there's an obstacle in the road, if the turn is sharper than I thought it would be, or if I need to slow for any other reason in the corner, I already have the motorcycle in the proper position in order to get the motorcycle to a stop. If I use slow look, press and roll, and I see something mid-corner, the MSF teaches if you're mid-corner to straighten up first and then brake, right? So you're gonna run out of your lane and then brake, or to use slight pressure on the brakes, and then as you are able to straighten the motorcycle up more, then you can go to more aggressive braking. Problem with this is that the motorcycle has already most of the weight on the rear tire, right? So you're coming in, you slow down, you look, you press, you roll, you're giving it throttle, right? So you're effectively reducing traction, or you're extending the forks on the front of the motorcycle. Then if something's there, I've got to get it straightened up, and then I've got to go progressively to the brakes again. So that reduces your stopping distance, and it gives you more to think about in order to get that motorcycle to a stop. However, if I'm using trail braking and I've maintained slight pressure, so I'm still keeping weight on that front tire, I've already loaded that front tire, and I'm ready to smoothly apply more braking if I need to. And this will keep the motorcycle in much more balanced position and give me a huge advantage over the rider who's using slow look, press and roll technique. Now, I think when most people hear the words trail braking, they think track and going faster around a corner. But for the street rider, it offers some advantages too, and it has nothing to do with speed. It has everything to do with keeping the motorcycle in the best position in case something surprises you out on the track. So if done correctly, in my opinion, it makes riding safer for the rider who has good brake and throttle control on his motorcycle. It's not a beginner technique, but it's a good intermediate to advanced level technique that I think riders in those positions should work on. So why have I adopted this for my everyday riding? Because I hear some riders say, yeah, I trail brake on occasion, but most of the time I use slow look, press and roll. Well, for the reasons I mentioned before, if I find an unexpected event mid-corner, I want to be prepared for it, And if I'm using that slow look, press, and roll technique, I'm off the brakes and it takes me longer to get the bike ready to brake aggressively. If I'm already trail braking going into the corner, I'm in a much better position to handle objects in the road or corners that are sharper than I initially thought, or any other unexpected event that may occur. We'll be having a discussion on this on the forums. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the subject. And until next week, guys, this is Kev with MC Rider, and I'll see you on the road.